Most people think success is built during the loud hours of the day. They think wealth is created in meetings, opportunities, networking, hard work, and visible effort. But the truth is quieter than that. The direction of your life is often decided at night, in those final moments when the world stops demanding things from you and you are left alone with your own mind. That is where discipline becomes real. Not when people are watching, not when motivation is high, not when pressure forces you to perform, but at the end of the day, when no one would blame you for shutting down completely, because that is the moment where most people unconsciously lose control of themselves. They tell themselves they deserve to relax, and they do. But relaxation slowly turns into distraction. One video becomes 5. One notification becomes an hour of scrolling. One moment of escape becomes a nightly pattern of mental exhaustion. And because nothing dramatic happens immediately, they never realize the damage accumulating quietly over time. They go to sleep mentally scattered, emotionally overstimulated, disconnected from purpose. And then they wake up wondering why they feel unmotivated, foggy, unfocused, and behind in life. What most people never understand is this: the final minutes before sleep are not empty. They are one of the most psychologically influential windows of your entire day. Because your conscious mind begins to slow down, resistance lowers, your thoughts become more impressionable, and whatever you repeatedly feed your mind during that state begins to sink deeper than you realize. Your mind continues working while you sleep. It organizes, it reinforces, it strengthens whatever you leave it with. If you end the night with stress, distraction, comparison, anxiety, and meaningless stimulation, your mind continues processing that long after your eyes close. But if you end the night with clarity, direction, reflection, and intention, something completely different begins to happen. Your mind starts working for you instead of against you. That is why successful people protect their evenings so carefully. Not because they are obsessed with routines, not because they are robotic, not because they never relax, but because they understand something most people ignore. Your future is quietly being shaped by what repeatedly enters your mind before sleep. And the difference between successful people and distracted people is often much smaller than it appears. Sometimes it is just 10 intentional minutes repeated consistently for years. 10 minutes to clear mental noise. 10 minutes to redirect your focus. 10 minutes to remind yourself who you are becoming. That sounds simple, almost too simple. And that is exactly why most people underestimate it. They are searching for dramatic breakthroughs, extreme routines, massive transformations. But real success is usually built through quiet repetition, small behaviors, repeated consistently, until they slowly reshape identity. Because your habits eventually become your self-image, and your self-image eventually controls your behavior. If every night you reinforce distraction, your life slowly reflects distraction. But if every night you reinforce clarity, discipline, direction, and intentional thinking, your life slowly begins to organize itself around those patterns. This is not about becoming obsessed with productivity. It is about learning how to stop ending your days unconsciously. Because most people are not failing from lack of potential. They are failing from lack of mental direction. They wake up reactive, spend the day distracted, and end the night overstimulated. Then they repeat the cycle again tomorrow. But there is another way to live, a calmer way, a more intentional way, a way that slowly builds emotional control, discipline, focus, and long-term success without needing fake hustle energy. And it begins at night, in silence, when you finally decide that the last moments of your day are too valuable to waste. Because once you control how your nights end, you slowly begin to control how your life moves forward. There is a reason why some people wake up with clarity while others wake up already mentally exhausted before the day even begins. The difference is rarely intelligence, it is rarely luck, and it is not always effort. More often than people realize, the difference was created the night before. Most people treat nighttime as an escape from life instead of preparation for it. The moment the responsibilities of the day are over, they immediately hand their attention to distraction. Endless scrolling, random videos, Emotional stimulation, noise. Their body may stop working, but their mind never truly settles into direction. It simply absorbs whatever is placed in front of it. And because this behavior feels normal, they never question it. But what feels normal is not always harmless. The human mind is highly suggestible before sleep. In those final moments, your conscious resistance weakens and your subconscious becomes more open. That means whatever repeatedly enters your mind during that state begins to shape your emotional patterns, your focus, your self-image, and eventually your behavior. That is why your nights matter far more than you think. A distracted night usually creates a distracted morning. A chaotic night usually creates a reactive day. And a clear night often creates a clear direction. Napoleon Hill understood this deeply. He believed the subconscious mind constantly responds to repeated thought. What you consistently impress upon your mind eventually influences your decisions, emotions, actions, and identity. This is why repetition matters more than intensity. One powerful night changes little, but hundreds of intentional nights quietly change a life. That is how millionaires are often built, not through dramatic moments alone, but through repeated mental conditioning. The average person spends their nights escaping from themselves. Successful people often spend their nights preparing themselves. That preparation does not need to be complicated. It does not require waking up at 4 a.m. It does not require obsession. It does not require becoming emotionally numb. It simply requires intention, because the real purpose of a night routine is not productivity. It is psychological alignment. It is teaching your mind what matters before sleep reinforces it. And the first step in this process is mental clearing. Most people carry the entire emotional weight of the day directly into bed. Unfinished conversations, regret, stress, comparison, self-criticism, anxiety about tomorrow. Their mind stays overloaded long after the day has ended. Then they wonder why they cannot rest deeply. The problem is not always physical exhaustion. Often it is unresolved mental noise. A mind full of scattered thoughts cannot enter rest peacefully because it is still trying to organize unfinished emotional tension. That is why the first few minutes of a powerful night routine should focus on releasing mental clutter instead of adding more stimulation. Not suppressing thoughts, not pretending problems do not exist, but calmly organizing the mind. Successful people often review the day briefly before sleep, not to judge themselves harshly, but to clear emotional residue. What worked today? What distracted me? What needs improvement? What no longer deserves my mental energy tonight? Those simple questions create awareness, and awareness creates control. Most people never pause long enough to examine their own mental patterns. They simply carry emotional chaos from one day into the next until stress becomes their permanent condition. But the disciplined person interrupts that cycle. They sit quietly for a few moments and mentally close the day with intention. They release unnecessary emotional weight instead of carrying it into tomorrow. This is extremely important because what remains emotionally unresolved often grows stronger overnight. A small frustration becomes anxiety. A minor insecurity becomes self-doubt. A temporary stress becomes emotional heaviness, not because the situation itself became larger, but because the mind kept reinforcing it unconsciously. This is why emotional discipline matters so much at night. The goal is not perfection. The goal is mental order. You are teaching your mind. This day is complete. I choose what deserves my energy tomorrow. That simple act changes the psychological atmosphere of your entire night. Now your mind becomes quieter, more focused, more receptive. And once mental clutter is reduced, the second step becomes powerful: intentional direction. Most people fall asleep reacting to life. Successful people often fall asleep directing their life. There is a massive difference between those two conditions. The average person ends the night thinking about random problems, social media, stress, comparison, or entertainment. The intentional person chooses a thought worth reinforcing, a goal, a vision, a direction, a principle, a future identity, not obsessively, not emotionally forcing it, just clearly. because whatever repeatedly occupies your mind before sleep slowly becomes psychologically familiar. And what becomes familiar eventually begins shaping behavior automatically. This is how identity changes. Not through one motivational speech, not through temporary excitement, but through repeated mental exposure. If every night you reinforce the identity of someone distracted, overwhelmed, emotionally reactive, and inconsistent, your behavior eventually follows that pattern. But if every night you reinforce the identity of someone calm, disciplined, focused, intentional, and growth-oriented, your behavior slowly begins aligning with it. This is why wealthy people often think differently long before they earn differently. Their internal patterns change first. Most people wait until success appears before changing their identity, but successful people often change identity before external results arrive. That is why they protect their thoughts so carefully. Your mind is always listening to what you repeatedly tell it, especially at night. That is why a simple nightly practice can become so powerful over time. Imagine ending every day with 10 intentional minutes where you disconnect from noise, clear emotional clutter, review your behavior honestly, reinforce direction, focus on long-term goals. Remind yourself who you are becoming. That does not look dramatic, but repeated over years, it changes the structure of your thinking. And once thinking changes consistently, behavior follows naturally. This is where many people misunderstand discipline. They think discipline means constantly forcing yourself to work harder. But true discipline is often quieter than that. It is protecting your mind from unnecessary chaos. It is refusing to let distraction shape your identity. It is choosing intentional thought instead of unconscious consumption. Millionaires are not simply people who make money. The most successful people usually develop an unusual level of mental direction. They think with purpose, reflect intentionally, control emotional impulses better than average people. And most importantly, they stop leaving their mental condition to chance because they understand something most people ignore. Your external life eventually reflects your internal patterns. If your thoughts are constantly scattered, your results usually become scattered. If your mind lacks direction, your actions eventually lose consistency. And if your nights are filled with distraction, your mornings usually begin with confusion. That is why protecting your final moments of the day matters so much, because your nights quietly shape your mornings. Your mornings shape your decisions. Your decisions shape your habits, and your habits shape your future. Most people are trying to fix their life during the day while sabotaging themselves every night. They seek motivation in the morning while feeding distraction before sleep. That contradiction creates inconsistency, and inconsistency slowly destroys confidence. Because every time you fail to direct your own mind, you reinforce the belief that your attention belongs to everything except your future. But the moment you begin ending your days intentionally, something changes internally. You stop feeling completely controlled by external noise. You begin developing emotional stability. You become less reactive, less scattered, less mentally exhausted. Not because your life suddenly became easier, but because your mind became more organized. That organization creates momentum, and momentum changes everything. Because once your mind begins working with you instead of against you, progress no longer feels as heavy. You stop constantly restarting. You stop spending every morning recovering from the previous night. You stop needing extreme motivation just to function. Instead, your life slowly gains rhythm, direction, consistency. And this is the part people underestimate most. The routine itself is not the real transformation. The real transformation is the identity being reinforced through repetition. Every night you are becoming someone. The only question is, who? The distracted version of yourself? Or the intentional version? The emotionally reactive person? Or the mentally disciplined one? The person who escapes every night? Or the person who quietly prepares for tomorrow? Because eventually, your repeated nighttime behavior becomes your personality. And your personality shapes your destiny. That is why those final 10 minutes matter far more than most people realize. They are not just minutes before sleep. They are instructions being handed to your future self. The powerful thing about a disciplined night routine is not what it does in one evening. It is what it prevents over the course of years. Most people do not destroy their potential through one catastrophic decision. They lose it slowly through repeated mental disorder, through distraction that becomes habit, through emotional exhaustion that becomes identity, through small nightly patterns that quietly train the mind to live without direction. And because the damage happens gradually, it often goes unnoticed. A person spends years overstimulated, mentally scattered, constantly reacting, constantly consuming, constantly distracted, and eventually they begin believing this condition is normal. They think feeling overwhelmed is adulthood. They think mental chaos is unavoidable. They think exhaustion is simply part of life. But much of it is self-created through unconscious repetition. Napoleon Hill often emphasized that whatever dominates the mind eventually influences reality, not magically, but behaviorally. Your dominant thoughts shape your emotional state. Your emotional state shapes your decisions shape your habits, and your habits shape your outcomes. This is why nighttime is so important, because nighttime determines what thought patterns are being reinforced daily. The average person spends the final hour of their day absorbing noise. The intentional person spends it shaping identity. That difference compounds. At first, it may seem invisible. One person scrolls endlessly until midnight. Another person spends 10 quiet minutes reflecting, organizing thoughts, reviewing goals, calming the mind, and mentally preparing for tomorrow. The external difference looks small, but psychologically, the difference is enormous. One condition trains emotional impulsiveness. The other trains emotional control. One reinforces distraction. The other reinforces direction. One creates dependency on stimulation. The other creates internal stability. And eventually, these patterns begin showing themselves everywhere else in life, because the mind does not separate your habits into categories. The same lack of control you practice at night eventually appears in your work, in your decisions, in your focus, in your finances, in your relationships. That is why disciplined people often appear calmer under pressure. They are not constantly training their mind to react impulsively. They have practiced stillness repeatedly, and stillness is becoming rare. Most people are uncomfortable being alone with their own thoughts. The moment silence appears, they immediately reach for stimulation, music, notifications, videos, messages, anything to avoid sitting quietly with themselves. But this constant stimulation weakens clarity. A distracted mind struggles to think deeply because it is always consuming instead of observing. That is why many people feel mentally exhausted despite doing very little meaningful work. Their attention is constantly fragmented, and fragmented attention creates fragmented living. The millionaire mindset people admire so much is often less about intelligence and more about sustained focus, the ability to hold attention on meaningful goals long enough for results to compound. But sustained focus cannot exist in a constantly overstimulated mind. That is why the evening routine matters psychologically. It becomes a training ground for attention. Every time you disconnect from unnecessary noise and intentionally direct your thoughts, you strengthen mental discipline. And discipline is not punishment. Discipline is the ability to remain aligned with what matters despite temporary impulses. Most people misunderstand this completely. They associate discipline with suffering, with extreme hustle, with forcing themselves into exhaustion. But true discipline often looks peaceful. It looks like turning your phone off earlier, sitting quietly for 10 minutes, reflecting honestly, preparing tomorrow intentionally, protecting your attention carefully. These small behaviors may not look impressive online, but they create extraordinary long-term stability. And stability creates power, because a stable person can remain consistent. An unstable person constantly restarts. This is why so many people stay trapped in cycles of motivation and collapse. They depend on emotional intensity instead of building structured habits. They wait until they feel ready. But successful people understand something different. Identity is built through repetition, not emotion. You do not become disciplined when you feel motivated. You become disciplined when repeated behavior becomes normal. That is why the night routine matters so much. Every evening becomes a vote for the type of person you are becoming. When you end the day intentionally, you reinforce self-respect, and self-respect changes behavior naturally. The person who respects themselves does not constantly sabotage tomorrow for temporary comfort tonight. They think long-term. That is one of the greatest psychological differences between successful people and unsuccessful people. Long-term thinking. Most people are controlled by immediate emotional reward. They want comfort now, entertainment now, relief now, escape now. But wealthy-minded individuals often tolerate temporary discomfort because they are emotionally connected to the future they are building. And nighttime reveals this clearly. The average person spends evenings escaping reality. The intentional person spends evenings preparing for reality. That preparation creates confidence, not fake confidence, not loud confidence, quiet confidence, the kind that comes from knowing you are consistently aligning your behavior with your future. That feeling changes how you walk through life. You become less desperate for validation, less reactive to setbacks, less emotionally dependent on temporary outcomes, because your confidence is no longer built on mood. It is built on consistency, and consistency creates internal trust. This is another reason successful people protect their evenings so carefully. They understand the subconscious mind is always learning from repetition. If every night ends in distraction, the mind learns distraction. If every night ends in intentional reflection, the mind learns awareness. If every night ends in emotional chaos, the mind learns instability. If every night ends in direction, the mind learns control. Eventually, these patterns stop feeling like effort. They become identity. And identity is powerful because people naturally act in alignment with who they believe they are. A person who believes they are scattered behaves differently than someone who believes they are disciplined. That belief influences thousands of tiny daily decisions, whether you follow through, whether you stay focused, whether you procrastinate, whether you remain calm under pressure, whether you continue after setbacks. Identity quietly controls behavior. This is why millionaire habits matter psychologically even before they matter financially. Because wealth often begins as a mental structure long before it becomes money. The ability to delay gratification, the ability to remain focused, the ability to think long-term, the ability to organize thought, the ability to stay emotionally grounded. These qualities are built internally first, and your nights either strengthen them or weaken them. Many people spend years searching for dramatic breakthroughs while ignoring the small, repeated behaviors quietly shaping their life every single day. But real transformation is often almost invisible in the beginning. A person starts sleeping earlier, reflecting nightly, planning intentionally, reducing distractions, protecting attention, thinking more clearly. Nothing dramatic happens immediately. But over time, their emotional state changes, their focus changes. Their decisions improve, their confidence grows, their opportunities increase, their relationships become healthier, their work becomes more intentional. Eventually, people call them successful, but success was never one moment. It was repetition. That is why the final minutes before sleep should never be treated casually. Those moments are not empty. They are programming. Every night, you are teaching your mind what matters. Most people teach their mind chaos unintentionally. The disciplined person teaches their mind clarity deliberately. And clarity changes life, because clarity removes hesitation. A clear mind wastes less energy, makes decisions faster, handles pressure better, avoids unnecessary drama, maintains focus longer. That advantage compounds over years. This is also why emotional control matters so much in the evening. Many people end the day emotionally overloaded but never process those emotions consciously. They suppress stress with distraction instead of resolving it with awareness. But suppressed emotion does not disappear. It accumulates, and eventually, accumulated emotional exhaustion begins affecting everything: motivation, energy, focus, confidence, relationships, physical health. That is why successful people often prioritize mental recovery instead of constant stimulation. The night routine becomes emotional maintenance, a moment to reset internally before entering another day, not by pretending life is perfect, not through toxic positivity, but through honest reflection and intentional direction. That honesty is important because growth cannot happen without awareness. Many people want transformation without self-examination, but the disciplined individual asks difficult questions honestly. Where did I waste energy today? What distracted me? Did my actions align with my goals? What must improve tomorrow? Not to attack themselves, not to feel shame, but to remain conscious. Unconscious living creates repeated mistakes. Conscious reflection creates adjustment, and adjustment creates progress. This is why the 10-minute night routine becomes so powerful psychologically. It forces awareness before repetition becomes identity. Without awareness, years disappear quickly. People repeat the same patterns endlessly while hoping circumstances somehow change. But circumstances rarely improve consistently when behavior remains unconscious. The intentional person understands this. They stop waiting for life to organize itself automatically. They begin organizing themselves first. And once internal order strengthens, external results usually improve naturally. Because disciplined thinking produces disciplined action. And disciplined action eventually produces opportunity. Not immediately, not magically, but consistently. This is what most people misunderstand about wealthy individuals. Many assume successful people simply have better opportunities, but often they simply became the type of person capable of recognizing and sustaining opportunity. That difference matters. An undisciplined mind often destroys good opportunities. A disciplined mind multiplies them. That is why the nightly routine is about much more than productivity. It is about becoming psychologically prepared for success. Prepared people notice opportunities faster, act more decisively, recover from setbacks quicker, maintain focus longer, handle pressure better, all because their internal condition is more organized. And internal organization creates external momentum. Eventually, this changes how life feels. The person no longer wakes up emotionally behind every day. They no longer feel constantly scattered, constantly reactive, constantly overwhelmed. Instead, there is a growing sense of control, not over every circumstance, but over themselves. And self-control changes everything, because when a person can direct their own mind consistently, they stop becoming controlled by every distraction, every emotion, every impulse, and every temporary difficulty. They become stable. And stability creates freedom. Freedom from constant emotional chaos. Freedom from endless procrastination. Freedom from needing motivation every day just to function. This is why millionaire habits often appear simple from the outside, because the real complexity is internal. It is emotional regulation, attention control, identity reinforcement, consistency, long-term thinking. And all of those qualities can quietly begin in 10 intentional minutes before sleep. That is the deeper meaning behind the routine. It is not really about becoming rich overnight. It is about becoming someone whose thinking, behavior, and emotional patterns slowly create a better future automatically. And that future is built one evening at a time. At the end of the day, most people do not lose their future in dramatic ways. They lose it quietly, through distraction, repeated daily, through thoughts left unmanaged, through evenings spent escaping instead of reflecting, through habits that slowly train the mind toward confusion instead of clarity. And because the damage happens gradually, it often feels harmless. One more night scrolling, one more night overstimulated, one more night ending the day mentally scattered and emotionally exhausted. But repetition always becomes identity. That is the principle most people fail to understand. Your life is not shaped only by your biggest decisions. It is shaped by what you repeatedly do when nobody is watching, especially at night, because nighttime is when the external noise finally slows down enough for the truth to appear. It is the moment where you either continue feeding distraction or begin building direction. That is why this 10-minute routine matters so much. Not because it is magical, not because it guarantees instant success, not because millionaires possess some secret ritual hidden from the world. Its power comes from something much deeper: intentional repetition. Every night you intentionally reset your mind, you strengthen self-control. Every night you reflect honestly, you strengthen awareness. Every night you prepare tomorrow with clarity, you strengthen direction. Every night you disconnect from chaos, you strengthen emotional stability. And over time, those small, invisible improvements begin changing everything else, because the quality of your life is deeply connected to the quality of your mind. A distracted mind creates distracted behavior. A reactive mind creates reactive decisions. A disciplined mind creates disciplined results. This is why successful people protect their evenings so carefully. They understand that wealth is not only financial. True wealth is clarity. True wealth is emotional control. True wealth is focus. True wealth is consistency. True wealth is the ability to direct your own thoughts instead of being controlled by every impulse around you. And that kind of wealth is built internally, long before it appears externally. The world often celebrates visible success while ignoring the invisible habits that created it. People admire confidence but ignore preparation. They admire discipline but ignore repetition. They admire results but ignore routine. But the routine is where identity is formed. What you repeatedly do before sleep eventually becomes the condition you wake up in. That is why the evening routine is not separate from your future. It is helping create it. Every night, you are either reinforcing distraction or reinforcing direction. There is no neutral repetition. The person who constantly ends the day overstimulated trains the mind toward chaos. The person who ends the day intentionally trains the mind toward control. And control changes outcomes, not instantly, not dramatically, but steadily. That is how real transformation usually happens. Quietly, a person begins sleeping with more peace, thinking with more clarity, acting with more intention, reacting less emotionally, following through more consistently, protecting their focus more carefully. At first, nobody notices. Then, eventually, everyone notices, because consistency always becomes visible over time. The calm person under pressure, the focused person in distraction, the disciplined person when others quit, the emotionally stable person in uncertainty. Those qualities are rarely built in public moments. They are built privately through repeated internal decisions. That is why the final minutes before sleep matter more than most people realize. They determine the emotional condition you carry into tomorrow, and tomorrow eventually becomes your life. Napoleon Hill believed that thoughts repeatedly impressed upon the mind eventually shape destiny, not through fantasy, not through wishing, but through conditioned behavior. The thoughts you repeat become beliefs. Beliefs shape actions. Actions repeated become habits. Habits repeated become identity, and identity shapes results. That entire process is happening every single day, whether you notice it or not. The question is whether you are directing it consciously, because if you do not intentionally shape your mind, the world will shape it for you. Notifications will shape it. Fear will shape it. Distraction will shape it. Comparison will shape it. Stress will shape it. And eventually, you may wake up years later wondering why your life feels so disconnected from the person you once wanted to become. But the good news is this: change does not require rebuilding your entire life overnight. It begins much smaller than that. 10 intentional minutes. One honest reflection. One moment of clarity. One decision to stop ending every day unconsciously. That is enough to begin shifting direction. And direction matters more than speed, because a person consistently moving in the right direction will eventually outperform someone constantly restarting emotionally. This is why discipline is not punishment. Discipline is self-respect repeated consistently. It is the decision to care enough about your future that you stop abandoning it every evening for temporary distraction. And once that shift happens internally, something powerful begins changing psychologically. You stop seeing routines as restrictions. You begin seeing them as protection. Protection for your attention. Protection for your energy. Protection for your goals. Protection for the person you are trying to become. That perspective changes everything, because successful people are not simply more motivated than everyone else. They are often more intentional. They understand that the future is not built someday. It is built daily, in small decisions, in repeated thoughts, in protected habits, in quiet evenings no one else sees. So tonight, before sleep, pause for a moment, turn away from the noise, disconnect from distraction, sit quietly with yourself, reflect honestly, clear your thoughts, prepare tomorrow intentionally. Remind yourself who you are becoming, not perfectly, not dramatically, consistently, because the life you want is rarely built through one breakthrough moment. It is built through repeated evenings where you choose clarity over chaos, direction over distraction, and discipline over impulse. And eventually, those small decisions begin creating something most people spend their entire lives searching for. A mind that is calm, a life that feels aligned, and a future that finally starts moving in your favor.